I fought the stick with everything I had, trying to keep my P-51 Mustang from nosediving into the channel. The aircraft shuddered violently, black smoke pouring from the engine where the German flak had torn through metal. Every muscle in my body tensed as I struggled to maintain control, the plane bucking beneath me like a wounded animal. "Come on, girl," I muttered, checking the compass with shaking hands. The needle wavered, but seemed to indicate I was heading north. If I was lucky, I was already crossing the English Channel, leaving occupied France behind. If not, well, surviving a crash landing was only the first problem I'd face. My radio was dead. Nothing but static came through my headset as I tried to call for help. I yanked it off, needing to focus every ounce of attention on keeping the bird in the air for as long as possible. Through patches of dense fog below me, I caught glimpses of dark green forest. My altitude kept dropping no matter how I fought the controls. The engine coughed, sputtered, then seized up completely. The sudden silence was almost as terrifying as the grinding metal that had preceded it. There, a break in the trees. A small clearing in the forest appeared through a gap in the fog. It wasn't much, but it was my only shot. I aimed the nose toward it, using what little control I still had. The altimeter spun downward at an alarming rate. "Just a little further," I said, gritting my teeth. The first impact came from the trees. Branches snapped against the fuselage and wings, each hit sending shock waves through the frame. Glass from the canopy cracked, then shattered inward. I ducked my head but felt something slice across my scalp. The ground rose up to meet me with brutal force. Metal screamed as the plane's belly scraped earth, then caught, flipping the craft partially onto its side. My head slammed forward, then back. The world spun in a nauseating blur of green and gray before everything finally, mercifully, stopped. For several minutes, I just hung there in my harness, blood dripping down my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The taste of copper filled my mouth. Every part of me hurt, but the sharp, searing pain in my left side told me something was very wrong. I fumbled with the harness release, my fingers clumsy and uncooperative. When it finally gave way, I collapsed against the side of the cockpit, letting out an involuntary cry as something stabbed deeper into my side. Getting out of the crumpled cockpit took all my remaining strength. I dragged myself through the shattered canopy, glass cutting my hands as I pulled my body free of the wreckage. When I finally fell to the ground, the impact sent fresh waves of pain through me. I lay on my back, staring up at gray sky through the gap in the trees my plane had created. The forest around me felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. No birds called, no insects buzzed. The thick fog that had looked so ominous from above now wrapped around the trees like ghostly fingers, seeming to swallow any sound before it could travel. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding muffled even to my own ears. "Anyone out there?" Nothing. Just the soft hiss of steam rising from my ruined engine. Moving carefully, I sat up to assess my injuries. The mirror in my survival kit showed a nasty gash across my scalp, blood matting my short brown hair. But head wounds always bled dramatically. It was the injury to my side that worried me more. Something had punctured through my flight jacket. When I carefully peeled back the torn leather, I found a jagged piece of metal embedded in my flesh, blood oozing steadily around it. "Don't remove it," I reminded myself aloud. "You'll bleed out faster." I turned to the emergency kit I'd managed to grab from the plane. Inside, I found what I expected. A compass, basic first aid supplies, a signal mirror, water purification tablets, a small flashlight, and my service pistol with a meager 8 rounds of ammunition. Not much to work with. but it would have to do. I cleaned the head wound as best I could and pressed a bandage against it. For my side, I carefully wrapped gauze around the protruding metal, stabilizing it rather than removing it. Each movement sent fresh pain shooting through me, but I kept working. If I wanted to survive the night, I needed shelter. By the time I finished with the bandages, darkness was creeping in. The fog, already thick, seemed to grow denser as daylight faded. The temperature dropped rapidly. Despite being early autumn, the air had a biting chill that seemed to seep through my flight jacket. Standing proved harder than I expected. My legs shook beneath me, and black spots danced in my vision. I grabbed a broken branch to use as a walking stick, then checked my compass. If I headed east, I might reach the coast, assuming I was actually in England and not still in France. Each step was agony. The forest floor was uneven, roots and rocks hidden beneath fallen leaves. I stumbled often, each jolt sending fresh pain through my side. The bandages I'd applied were already soaking through with blood, and I could feel my strength ebbing with each passing minute. The fog played tricks on my eyes, shapes forming and dissolving as I limped forward. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, though I saw no sign of any other living creature, just endless trees and swirling mist. I lost track of time as I pushed on, one painful step after another. My thoughts grew muddled. I knew it was the blood loss making me lightheaded, but that knowledge didn't help clear my mind. When I first saw it, I thought it was another trick of the fog, a large dark shape looming ahead. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the shape remained. As I drew closer, it took form. A 2-story house standing alone in a small clearing, completely isolated in the vast forest. No lights shone from any of the windows. No smoke rose from the chimney. It had an abandoned look to it, the kind of place that might have been empty for years. But it was a structure, solid and real. It offered walls against the cold night air that was already making me shiver. Maybe there would be supplies inside, something to help me treat my wounds properly. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the house. It wasn't what I'd hoped to find. A friendly village or a military outpost would have been better. But in my condition, I couldn't afford to be picky. Night was falling fast, and with it, my chances of survival if I remained exposed to the elements. With no better options, I took a deep breath and started across the clearing toward the silent house. I approached the weathered porch when I heard a telephone ringing inside the abandoned house. The sound was bizarre, so normal yet completely out of place in the middle of what I assumed was occupied France. My legs nearly buckled as I climbed the 2 short steps, each movement reopening the wound in my side. I tried the door, which opened with creaking hinges that seemed to protest after long disuse. The ringing continued, pulling me forward despite my better judgment. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I followed the sound through a dim entryway. Dust particles swirled in what little light filtered through the grimy windows. I tracked the ringing to an old black rotary telephone sitting on a dusty table in what must have been the living room. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, yet it rang insistently. I stared at it for several seconds, wondering if I was hallucinating from blood loss or head trauma. Finally, I picked up the receiver and held it to my ear. "Hello? You need to leave. Now." The man's voice on the other end sounded desperate, crackling with static. "This isn't a safe place." "Who is this?" I asked, looking around the empty room. "Glenn Bishop. I used to own this house." More static cut through his words. "Please, listen to me. You need to get out before she knows you're here." "Before who knows I'm here?" "Ellen Rivera." His voice dropped to a whisper. She trapped me here. She's kept me here for years, making me relive my death over and over. I gripped the phone tighter. Your death? My suicide. She drove me to it, haunted me until I couldn't take it anymore. I hung myself upstairs and now I'm stuck in this hell. His voice cracked with emotion. The house doesn't let people leave once they stay too long. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Right. And I'm talking to a ghost. I'm trying to help you, Glenn insisted. No one warned me. I can't let it happen to someone else. My head throbbed, and I touched the bandage wrapped around it. Look, thanks for the concern, but I need shelter and medical attention. I'm not leaving. I hung up before he could say anything else. The phone call was clearly a hallucination, a product of my injured brain and the blood I'd lost. I needed to focus on survival, not ghost stories. The house was cold, much colder than it should have been for early summer. I shivered and decided to explore, hoping to find supplies. Each room was layered in dust and cobwebs, but the kitchen yielded unexpected treasures. Canned food stacked in a pantry, and a hand pump that, after several rusty attempts, produced clear water. I carried my findings back to the living room and set them on a small table. First, I needed to properly treat my wounds. I removed the hasty bandages I'd applied in the forest and examined the shrapnel in my side. It wasn't deep enough to hit any organs, but it needed to come out. Using water from the pump, I cleaned around the wound, then gritted my teeth and pulled the metal fragment free. The pain was blinding. I quickly packed the wound with more sulfa powder from my emergency kit and wrapped it with fresh bandages. Next, I cleaned my head wound and replaced that bandage too. The temperature seemed to drop further as evening approached. I noticed a fireplace at one end of the room and decided to light a fire. There was an old stack of firewood nearby that looked dry enough to burn. I arranged some smaller pieces with scraps of newspaper I found, then struck one of my precious matches. The paper caught, then the kindling, and soon I had a small blaze going. I sat back on a dusty sofa near the fire, finally allowing myself to relax slightly. My body felt heavy with exhaustion. I opened one of the canned beans I'd found and ate slowly, not bothering to heat them. The food helped steady me, though my thoughts remained fuzzy around the edges. As I finished eating, I heard a scratching sound from upstairs, like fingernails dragging across wood. I looked up at the ceiling, tracking the noise as it moved from one end of the upstairs to the other. Just the wind, I muttered to myself. Or mice. I had bigger concerns than investigating strange noises. My wounds needed rest to heal, and I was too weak to go anywhere tonight. I stretched out on the sofa, positioning myself to face the door out of habit. My service pistol rested on the floor within easy reach. Despite the scratching continuing overhead, my exhaustion won out, and I fell into a restless sleep. I woke suddenly to the shrill ring of the telephone. The fire had burned down to embers, casting the room in dim red light. I struggled to my feet, my body stiff and painful, and stumbled to the phone. "What?" I answered gruffly. "Check your watch," Glenn's voice urged. "Please, just check your watch." I sighed but looked down at my wrist. My watch face gleamed in the dying firelight. The hour and minute hands showed 4:23, just as they had since the crash. But now I noticed something I hadn't before. The second hand was stuck between 37 and 38 seconds. "So it's broken," I said. I knew that already. "No, you don't understand," Glenn replied. "It's not broken. Time has stopped for you. The house has you now." I stared at the second hand, willing it to move. I held the watch to my ear. No ticking. I shook it. Nothing. The second hand remained frozen between 37 and 38 seconds, never advancing. I tried to leave. After that bizarre conversation about time being frozen, I wasn't staying another minute in this place. I grabbed my gear and limped back down the hallway toward the front door. My side throbbed with each step, but fear pushed me forward faster than pain could hold me back. The brass knob turned easily in my hand, clicking as the latch released. But when I pulled, nothing happened. The door wouldn't move an inch. I tried again, putting my shoulder into it despite the sharp protest from my injured side. The door felt like it was made of solid stone rather than wood. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying the knob again and again, each attempt more desperate than the last. Maybe another exit. The kitchen had to have a back door. I hobbled through the living room, past the dying embers in the fireplace, and into the kitchen. There was indeed a back door, but it suffered from the same impossible stillness as the front. I twisted the handle and pushed with all my weight. Nothing. Windows were my next hope. I went to the nearest one in the kitchen and tried to unlock the latch. It moved, but when I pushed up on the window frame, it wouldn't budge. It was as if someone had nailed or glued it shut from the outside. I tried another window in the living room with the same result. "This can't be happening," I whispered to myself, feeling the walls closing in around me. The silence broke suddenly with a burst of static. I spun around, nearly losing my balance, to see an old wooden radio on a small table in the corner of the living room crackling to life. Its dial lit up with a warm amber glow that seemed out of place in the cold room. "Jude Harrington." A woman's voice whispered through the static, each syllable of my name drawn out like she was savoring it. My blood ran cold. I hadn't told anyone here my full name. "Who's there?" I demanded, moving toward the radio. "Who are you?" The static faded, and instead of an answer, a delicate melody began to play. A music box lullaby, haunting and sweet, filled the room with its tinkling notes, the kind that would normally be played for a child. But here it sounded wrong, threatening somehow, like a beautiful flower with poison-tipped thorns. As the lullaby continued, I heard a loud thump from upstairs, as if something heavy had fallen, or someone had taken a step with unnatural weight. My hand moved to the service pistol tucked in my waistband. I pulled it out, checking that it was loaded. 8 rounds, just as I'd confirmed earlier. Not much, but better than nothing against whatever was up there. I moved to the base of the stairs, looking up into the darkness of the second floor. The lullaby from the radio continued playing behind me, providing an eerie soundtrack to my slow ascent. Each step creaked under my weight, announcing my approach to whatever waited above. My injured leg protested as I climbed, and I used the banister to pull myself up more than to steady myself. The wound in my side felt warm and wet. I was bleeding again, the bandages not holding against my exertion. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused to catch my breath. A long hallway stretched before me, with doors on either side. At the far end, something caught my eye. A rope hung from the ceiling, fashioned into a noose at the end, swinging gently as if disturbed by a breeze. But there was no breeze in this stagnant house. I raised my gun, pointing it toward the swaying rope as I took a cautious step forward. The floorboards creaked under my feet. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting breaking the silence. The noose stopped swinging for a moment, then suddenly pulled taut with a violent jerk. I stumbled back a step as a figure materialized within the noose, a man's body, hanging from the ceiling, feet dangling above the floor. It was him. Glenn Bishop. The same voice from the phone. He hung there, his face contorted in agony, eyes bulging and mouth frozen in a silent scream. His form wasn't solid. I could see the wall behind him through his body. But he was clear enough that I could make out every detail of his suffering. Despite being semi-transparent, his eyes moved, focusing directly on me. They were alive in his dead face, filled with recognition and pain. I couldn't help it. I cried out and stumbled backward, nearly falling down the stairs. My pistol clattered to the floor as I grabbed the banister to keep from falling. I didn't stop to pick up the gun. I just turned and half ran, half fell down the stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. I made my way back to the study where the phone had rung earlier. My hands shook as I grabbed the receiver and held it to my ear. "Glenn?" I called into the phone, not knowing if he could hear me this way. "Glenn, answer me." The line crackled, and then his voice came through, strained and tired. "I'm here," he said. "I just saw you," I said, my voice breaking. "Upstairs, hanging from—" "I know." He cut me off. "I told you. I relive my death every night in this place. How do I get out of here? Nothing's working. The doors, the windows. I'm trapped." "There might be a way," Glenn said after a pause. "You need to find Ellen Rivera's journal. I never found it myself, but she kept records of her magic, her curse. It might contain the key to breaking free of this place." "Where would it be?" I asked, desperately clinging to this thread of hope. "I don't know for certain. I searched for years, but—" His voice trailed off. "You need to look everywhere. This was her house originally. Check for hidden compartments, false bottoms and drawers. The bedroom upstairs, not the one where you saw me, the main bedroom at the end of the hall, that was hers." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "A journal. Okay. And who is she exactly? This Ellen Rivera?" "A witch," Glenn replied simply. "And she wants your soul just like she took mine." I gripped the receiver tighter, looking back toward the stairs I would have to climb again. The stairs that led to where I'd just seen Glenn's hanging body. Where I'd have to go to find Ellen's bedroom and, hopefully, her journal. "I need to get my gun first," I said, more to myself than to Glenn. "Be careful," Glenn warned. "She knows you're trying to escape now. She'll try to stop you." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the dial tone buzzing in my ear like an angry wasp. I searched the house methodically, tearing through bookshelves and drawers in my desperate hunt for Ellen's journal. My side burned with each movement, the bandages pulling against dried blood. But I couldn't stop. I needed to find a way out of this nightmare. The living room yielded nothing but dusty novels and photo albums filled with strangers' faces. The kitchen cabinets contained only chipped dishes and rusted utensils. I dragged myself upstairs, trying not to look at the spot where Glenn's hanging form had appeared. Each bedroom revealed the same story: abandoned clothing, personal items left behind, as if the occupants had simply walked away. I checked under mattresses, inside wardrobes, behind picture frames. My hands shook from exhaustion and pain, but I kept going, driven by the knowledge that the journal was my only hope. The main bedroom at the end of the hall was larger than the others, with heavy curtains drawn across the windows and a four-poster bed centered against the wall. I dropped to my knees and ran my hands over the floorboards, wincing as splinters dug into my fingers. A slight difference in spacing between two boards caught my attention. One plank moved slightly when I pressed down. I wedged my fingers into the gap and pulled upward, gritting my teeth against the pain shooting through my side. The board came loose, revealing a small space beneath. "Come on, be here," I muttered, reaching into the darkness. My fingers touched something solid, leather, cold and dry with age. I pulled it out and found myself holding a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked and worn. The pages were yellowed, filled with strange symbols and text written in a cramped, angular hand. As I flipped through the pages, the windows rattled violently, shaking in their frames as if caught in a sudden windstorm. I nearly dropped the journal, my heart pounding as I looked up. The rattling grew more intense, the glass vibrating so hard I thought it might shatter. I limped to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside in the clearing stood a woman dressed in black, her hair wild around her pale face. Ellen Rivera. She stared directly at me, her eyes visible even from this distance, dark, hollow points of hatred. I felt pinned by her gaze, unable to move or look away. Then she simply vanished, dissolving into the mist like smoke. The windows stopped rattling immediately. The silence felt more threatening than the noise. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking as I opened the journal again. Most pages contained symbols I didn't recognize, pentagrams, circles filled with strange lettering, diagrams of the human body with lines connecting different points. Some entries were written in English, others in what looked like Latin. One entry caught my eye, dated April 28th, 1692. They come for me tomorrow. The fools think rope and fire will end what I have begun. My blood shall feed this earth, and my spirit shall never leave it. All who dwell here shall know my suffering. All who seek shelter shall become prisoners. I, Ellen Rivera, bind my curse to this land until the day my remains are purified by flame. I turned more pages, learning pieces of the story. Ellen had been executed for witchcraft after several children in a nearby village died mysteriously. The land remained abandoned for over 200 years until Glenn Bishop, a World War I veteran, bought the property in 1919, hoping to escape his war memories. He killed himself a year later. The entries after Glenn's suicide weren't written by Ellen anymore. They were different handwritings, different people, each one describing their arrival at the house and growing realization that they couldn't leave. Some entries were just a few lines long. Others covered pages with increasingly desperate scrawls. I felt sick reading them. 12 different accounts from 12 different people, all trapped in this house, all meeting the same end. The latest entry dated from 1943, just a few months ago. I turned to the final pages, and my blood ran cold. There was a list of names, each one crossed out. I recognized them from the entries, the 12 previous victims, and beneath them all, written in what looked like fresh blood, still glistening on the page, was my own name, Jude Harrington. I slammed the journal shut, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room felt suddenly colder, the shadows in the corners deeper than before. I tucked the journal under my arm and made my way back downstairs as quickly as my injuries would allow. The phone began ringing before I reached the bottom step. I already knew who it was. I crossed the living room and entered the study, picking up the receiver with unsteady hands. "Glenn," I said. "She knows you found it." His voice crackled with static, but the fear in it came through clearly. "She was there, watching you. I saw her too." "I saw her outside," I said. "She just stood there, staring at me, then disappeared. She'll come for you now." The line filled with white noise for a moment before Glenn's voice returned. "The journal is dangerous to her. It contains her weaknesses as well as her power. There are 12 names in here, 12 people before me. Yes, and they all died here, just like I did. The line crackled again. Jude, listen to me. You're running out of time. She won't let you leave with that knowledge. There has to be a way out, I said, pressing the receiver harder against my ear. The journal mentioned her execution, how she cursed the land. She wrote something about her blood feeding the earth and her spirit never leaving until her remains are purified by flame. I don't know. Glenn sounded defeated. I've been trapped here for 25 years, watching others come and die. The house always looks different to each new victim. It appears as whatever might make them stay. For you, a shelter from the war. For me, a peaceful retreat from battle memories. I opened the journal again, determined to find something Glenn had missed. There must be more specific information, I said, flipping through the pages with renewed purpose. I examined each page carefully, focusing on the symbols and diagrams I'd skipped before. On one page, I found a crude map of the property with the oak tree marked prominently. Beneath it was written, "My flesh and blood beneath the oak, my spirit bound to silver glass." Next to this was a detailed drawing of an ornate hand mirror. Glenn, it mentions something about her remains under the oak tree behind the property, I said, studying the diagram. And something about silver glass, a mirror, I think. Does that mean anything to you? The line went silent for so long I thought the connection had broken. Finally, Glenn's voice returned, quieter than before. The oak. Yes, I remember digging there once, early on. I found something. A box, I think. But she stopped me before I could open it. After that, the noose appeared in the hallway. I turned to the last page of the journal and noticed something I'd missed before. A small piece of torn paper tucked into the binding. I carefully extracted it and unfolded a page covered in Latin text with an English translation beneath. What earth has claimed, fire must release. What silver holds, flame shall free. The curse is tied to her remains, I said, pieces falling into place. She's buried under that oak tree. I watched as the lights flickered around me, dimming and brightening in an unnatural rhythm. The air grew colder, making my breath visible in small puffs. A blue-white glow gathered in the center of the room, swirling like smoke before taking shape. Glenn's spectral form materialized in front of me, his translucent body floating several inches above the floor. The rope marks around his neck stood out starkly against his pale skin, a permanent reminder of his death. You found the journal, Glenn said, his voice sounding both near and distant at once. But there's more you need to know. His eyes darted nervously to the corners of the room, as if expecting someone or something to be listening. Tell me, I said, clutching the journal tighter against my side. My wound throbbed with each heartbeat. Ellen's power comes from a silver mirror buried with her remains, Glenn explained, his form flickering like a bad television signal. After they hanged her, they buried her beneath the oak tree behind this house. The mirror. It captures souls. It's how she's kept me here, how she's trapped all of us. A mirror? I asked, trying to make sense of it. Glenn nodded, his face contorting with remembered pain. I found it once, years ago. When I touched it, I felt her inside my head. That's when everything started. That's when I couldn't leave anymore. I processed this information, looking down at the journal in my hands. If what Glenn was saying was true, finding and destroying this mirror might be my only chance to break the curse and escape. I have to dig it up, I said, more to myself than to Glenn. Yes, but she'll try to stop you, Glenn warned, his form beginning to fade. She knows what you're planning. Be careful, Jude. Don't end up like me." With that final warning, Glenn disappeared, leaving me alone in the cold, dimly lit room. I knew what I had to do. Despite the pain shooting through my side with every movement, I began gathering what I'd need. First, I searched the shed attached to the back of the house, finding a rusty shovel leaning against the wall. Its handle was worn smooth from years of use, and flakes of rust came off on my hands when I gripped it. Next, I needed fire. I found matches in a kitchen drawer, old but still dry enough to work. I tested one, striking it against the box and watching the small flame spring to life before blowing it out. For my final supply, I found an old lantern in the hallway closet. The glass was clouded with age, but when I unscrewed the base, I discovered it was half full of kerosene. The sharp, acrid smell hit my nostrils as I carefully poured some into an empty can I found under the sink. This would be enough. With my supplies gathered, I knew I needed to get outside. I tried the doors again, but they remained firmly shut, as if sealed by an invisible force. I had only one option left. I dragged a wooden chair from the kitchen table, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. Positioning it in front of the window above the sink, I took a deep breath, feeling my injured side protest. With all the strength I could muster, I swung the chair at the glass. The window shattered with a crash that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Shards of glass fell into the sink and onto the floor around my feet. An inhuman shriek tore through the house, making the walls vibrate and my ears ring. It wasn't coming from any one direction, but seemed to emanate from the house itself, as if the building was alive and in pain. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I cleared the remaining glass from the window frame with the shovel handle and hauled myself up onto the counter. Pain shot through my side as the movement reopened my wound. I could feel warm blood beginning to soak through the bandages again. I squeezed through the window opening, scraping my shoulder on a jagged piece of glass I'd missed. When my feet hit the ground outside, the cold night air hit me like a physical blow. After being trapped inside for so long, the open space should have felt liberating. But something was wrong. A thick fog had settled around the property, but it wasn't behaving like normal fog. It swirled angrily, forming patterns too deliberate to be natural. As I limped toward the massive oak tree at the edge of the clearing, the fog seemed to reach for me with ghostly fingers, then pull back, as if testing an invisible boundary. The oak tree loomed ahead, its gnarled branches stretching upward like arthritic fingers. It was enormous, far older than the house, with a trunk so wide I couldn't have wrapped my arms even halfway around it. This was where Ellen was buried, where her remains and that cursed mirror had lain for centuries. I began digging at the base of the tree, driving the rusty shovel into the earth with as much force as I could manage. Each thrust sent waves of pain through my side. The first few shovelfuls of dirt were the hardest, but I soon established a rhythm, ignoring how my bandages grew damper with each movement. My blood was now soaking through my clothes, leaving dark stains on my shirt. The fog continued to swirl around me, growing thicker and more agitated. I could almost hear whispers in it, voices just below the threshold of understanding. My arms grew heavier with each shovelful of earth, and my breathing became labored. Still, I kept digging, knowing this was my only chance. After what felt like hours, the shovel struck something solid with a dull thunk. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the pain that shot through my body, and began clearing away the remaining dirt with my hands. My fingers scraped against wood, a box, roughly the size of a small trunk. I cleared away enough earth to expose the top of the wooden container. It was old, the wood rotted in places, with metal bands around it that had nearly rusted away completely. With trembling hands, I pried open the lid. Inside lay human bones, arranged as they would have been in life. A complete skeleton. They were yellowish-brown with age, but unmistakably human. And there, clutched in the skeletal hands and positioned where the face would have been, was the mirror. It was small, about the size of my hand, with an ornate silver frame tarnished almost black with age. The glass itself was cloudy but still reflective. Even in the dim light, I could see my own face looking back at me, pale and drawn with pain and exhaustion. As I reached for the mirror, the air around me seemed to solidify. The fog condensed, gathering into a human shape. Ellen materialized before me, her face twisted with rage. Her black hair writhed around her head as if alive, and her eyes burned with an unnatural light. "Those belong to me," she hissed, her voice sounding like dry leaves scraping against stone. "You have no right." I didn't respond, keeping my eyes on the mirror and bones. Now that I had found them, I needed to destroy them. My can of kerosene sat at the edge of the hole within reach. Ellen drifted closer, her form becoming more solid with each passing second. "Put them back," she commanded. "Cover them again, and I might let you live." As she spoke, I glanced down at the mirror again and froze. My reflection wasn't mimicking my movements. While I was still, my reflection seemed to pound against the glass from the inside, its mouth open in a silent scream. Behind my reflection, I could make out other faces. Dozens of them, all trapped within the small confines of the mirror. Understanding what needed to be done, I lunged for the can of kerosene, my side screaming in protest. I unscrewed the cap and poured the liquid over both the bones and the mirror. The strong smell filled the air, making my eyes water. Ellen shrieked, the sound piercing through me like a physical pain. "Stop! If you destroy them, you'll make the curse permanent. You'll be trapped here forever." I hesitated for just a moment, my hand already reaching for the matches. What if she was telling the truth? Then I remembered something I had read in the journal. Witches lie when their power is threatened. It was a desperate attempt to save herself, to preserve the source of her power. "Nice try," I muttered, striking a match. The small flame flickered in the night air. Ellen lunged toward me, her ghostly hands reaching for my throat, but she couldn't seem to cross some invisible line around the grave. She screamed in frustration, her face transforming into something inhuman and terrible. I dropped the match. The kerosene caught immediately, flames racing across the bones and the mirror. Ellen's scream became something beyond human as the fire grew. The mirror began to glow, not with the orange of the flames, but with a bright, painful white light that grew in intensity until I had to shield my eyes. Then I heard them. Voices, dozens of them, crying out not in pain, but in release. The mirror was melting, its silver frame twisting and bubbling with supernatural intensity. As it did, I caught glimpses of faces in the flames, appearing for just a moment before dissolving into the air, finally free. Ellen's form began to unravel, strands of her being pulled toward the melting mirror as if it were a drain. "No!" she screamed, her voice growing fainter. "No, no, no!" I watched as the mirror consumed her, drawing her essence back into itself even as it was destroyed by the flames. The bones blackened and cracked in the heat, turning to ash before my eyes. I stood before the smoldering remains of Ellen's grave as dawn broke over the forest. The fire had burned itself out, leaving behind blackened earth and gray ash, where her bones and the silver mirror had been. My side throbbed with a dull ache, and dried blood caked the bandages I'd wrapped around my torso. The night had been long, but somehow I was still standing. When I turned around to look at the farmhouse, I stopped dead. What I saw made no sense at first. Where the two-story structure had stood just hours ago, there was nothing but a collapsed ruin. The roof had caved in completely. Walls had crumbled to piles of rotted timber and stone. Weeds and small trees grew through what remained of the foundation. It looked as if it had been abandoned and left to decay for decades. I blinked hard, thinking my exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But the ruined house remained. Then understanding washed over me like cold water. All this time, I hadn't been seeing the actual house. I'd been seeing a ghost of it, preserved by Ellen's curse just as it had looked when Glenn lived there. The building I'd slept in, the rooms I'd searched, the staircase I'd climbed. None of it physically existed anymore. Ellen had kept it intact in some kind of supernatural memory, trapped in the moment of Glenn's death. With her curse broken, reality had snapped back into place. The truth revealed itself in daylight. I limped closer to what remained of the structure, clutching my wounded side. I recognized the general shape of what had once been the living room where I'd slept. Now just a depression in the earth with a few stone foundation blocks marking its boundaries. The fireplace where I'd warmed myself stood as a partial chimney, the only feature still somewhat intact. In the distance, I heard the rumble of engines. I turned toward the sound, straining to see through the trees. The noise grew louder. Multiple vehicles approaching along what must have been an old road I hadn't noticed before. Military vehicles, by the sound of them. I stayed where I was, too tired and hurt to run, even if I'd wanted to. Within minutes, 3 British Army jeeps broke through the tree line about 50 yards away. The lead vehicle stopped, and soldiers spilled out with weapons ready. "Over here," I called, raising my hand slowly despite the pain it caused. They approached cautiously, rifles aimed in my direction until they saw my blood-stained flight jacket and American insignia. "We've got a pilot," one of them shouted back to the others. He was a young sergeant with a Manchester accent. American by the looks of him. 2 more soldiers jogged up while the sergeant addressed me. "Lieutenant, what's your name and squadron?" "First Lieutenant Jude Harrington, 812th Fighter Squadron," I said, my voice scratchy from thirst. "My plane went down yesterday. I think it was yesterday." The sergeant nodded and waved toward the other vehicles. "We've been looking for you, sir. Spotters reported a downed Mustang in this area. Did you encounter any enemy patrols?" I shook my head. "No Germans, just—" I glanced back at the ruined house, then at the smoldering remains of Ellen's grave. "Just had to find shelter and tend my wounds." A medic arrived carrying a canvas bag. He guided me to sit on a fallen log while he examined the crude bandages I'd fashioned. "These wounds need proper attention," he said, applying fresh dressings to my side. "The head injury isn't too bad, but you've lost blood from the shrapnel wound. How'd you manage to treat yourself?" "Found some supplies," I said, offering nothing more. While the medic worked, the sergeant questioned me about my crash landing and how I'd ended up here. I gave him the bare minimum, that my plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire, I'd crashed in the clearing, found the ruins, and spent the night there. I said nothing about the house as I'd seen it, nothing about Glenn's ghost, nothing about Ellen's curse or the journal. They wouldn't have believed me anyway, and I didn't need them thinking I was delirious from my injuries. "Lucky we found you," the sergeant said, looking skeptically at the collapsed structure. Not much shelter in that old ruin. Must have been rough. "You have no idea," I replied. After the medic finished his work, 2 soldiers helped me toward one of the jeeps. The sergeant had radioed ahead, and they were preparing to transport me to a field hospital. As they guided me across what had once been the front yard of the house, something caught my eye, a flash of light reflecting off an object half buried in the dirt. "Wait," I said, stopping. I dropped something. The soldiers paused, and I bent down, wincing at the pain in my side. There, partially exposed in the soil, was a small silver shard about the size of my thumbnail. It gleamed unnaturally bright in the morning sun. I recognized it immediately. A fragment of Ellen's mirror that must have been flung here when the fire destroyed it. Without thinking about why, I picked it up and slipped it into my pocket. Something told me I shouldn't leave it behind. The soldiers didn't seem to notice or care about my small detour as they helped me the rest of the way to the Jeep. The ride to the field hospital was bumpy, each jolt sending fresh waves of pain through my injured side. I drifted in and out of consciousness, the silver shard a small, cold presence against my leg through the pocket fabric. I wondered why I'd taken it, why I felt it was important to keep this one piece of the cursed object I'd worked so hard to destroy. At the field hospital, doctors properly cleaned and stitched my wounds. They gave me morphine for the pain and antibiotics to prevent infection. I was transferred later that day to a military hospital further behind the lines, where I was given a real bed in a ward with other injured airmen. I slept deeply for the first time since my crash, the silver shard tucked safely under my pillow where I could keep track of it. That night, I dreamed of Glenn Bishop. But unlike the tormented ghost I'd seen hanging from the noose, this Glenn stood straight and tall. His neck was unmarked, his eyes clear and peaceful. We stood in a bright, empty space that seemed neither here nor there. "You did it," he said, his voice no longer crackling with static or tension. "You broke her hold on us." "All of you are free?" I asked. Glenn nodded. The others crossed over immediately. "I wanted to thank you before I joined them. I'm sorry I couldn't save you," I told him. "You did save me," he replied with a gentle smile. "Just not in the way you think." He started to fade around the edges. "Goodbye, Jude, and thank you." I woke up in the hospital ward with early morning light filtering through the windows. Other patients were still sleeping in their beds. My hand instinctively reached under my pillow, fingers finding the small silver fragment. The nightmare was over. Ellen Rivera's curse was broken, her power destroyed, along with the mirror and her remains. Glenn and the others were free. Yet I knew I would never forget the phantom frequency that had nearly claimed another victim, me. I would never forget the house that wasn't there, the phone that shouldn't have rung, or the ghost who helped me escape. I closed my eyes, listened to the normal, mundane sounds of the hospital around me, and felt grateful for each one.